Welcome everyone joining us. This is Chris Posey with the Atlanta Urban Debate League. I'm going to jump right in and get started. We're going to be continuing a larger discussion regarding the fundamentals of debate with a section on flowing. More fundamentals presentations and other topics with many other sections will be available on our website at atlantadebate.org and soon via our Atlanta Debate YouTube channel. Before getting into some specifics and strategies for successful flowing, let's quickly talk about why flowing is important. Most likely, flowing is something that is also important to your judge. For the judge, you want to stay in sync and facilitate an accurate and organized flow of your arguments. At the end of the debate, when all the speeches are over, what your judge has written on their flow is truly the last word. Flowing and keeping an accurate flow in mind creates an incentive for you and your partner to organize your arguments. Adding numbers and other ordinal structures or separating flows for different advantages can help you stay organized when it comes to debating your side's arguments. The same, of course, can be said for organizing your opponent's arguments. Flowing creates an accurate record of your opponent's positions and responses necessary to effectively respond yourself. Dropped or disorganized arguments can make the difference between the winner or a loss, and depending on how the round is, and depending on how important the argument ends up being in the mind of the judge. An accurate flow can be your best tool for enabling effective out-of-round preparation and skill development. Being able to recite arguments made in debates allows you to strategize at your own pace and with the assistance of team members and coaches. Sharing your flow with coaches and teammates can help you conduct rebuttal redos and practice debates that replicate difficult in-round situations. These flows can prove vital when preparing for an opponent that you or a team member have debated previously. Flowing is very much a personalized skill. Over the years, experienced and new debaters alike draw on their own and community experiences to incorporate techniques that help them accurately record and know what's happening in each debate. While there isn't a really wrong way to flow, there are certainly effective and ineffective flowing strategies. Some strategies are effective or ineffective depending on the person or depending on other circumstances of the round, including the judge. We're going to quickly review a few topics and strategies that should help you get started. More in-depth discussions on flowing and other resources can always be found on our website at atlantadebate.org. Right now we're going to review organization by speech and type, following or leading the flow, abbreviations, and separating of arguments. Many, if not most, experienced debaters tend to flow in columns that separate each speech. This method allows debaters to record responses to arguments in line with where they were made in the previous speech. For example, if the 1AC made the argument that China will join the TPP, you would notate this in the first of probably 7 columns, one for each speech. Any negative response in the 1NC to this particular affirmative argument would be notated directly to the right of this argument in the second column, designated for the 1NC. Starting in the 2AC, oftentimes affirmative teams will flow in roadmap advantages and solvency on separate sheets of paper or in separate worksheets. For example, an affirmative might flow its case on 3 sheets of paper, one for inherency in the plan, one for a relations advantage, and one for solvency. This keeps things organized if the negative chooses to respond to these arguments in a different order. Many negative teams will separate different off-case positions on different and separate sheets of paper. For example, the disadvantage, the counterplan, the critique would all have separate sheets and would be referenced and ordered easily. Separating these arguments makes it easier for the debaters and the judge to follow along when the negative divides their arguments for the negative block. In regards to the negative block, a couple things should be notated. When drawing columns for each speech, it's beneficial to combine the 2NC and the 1NR columns together, as Most successful negative teams are going to divide the arguments clearly between the speeches and try and eliminate any overlap, effectively dividing the block to put as much pressure as possible, of course, on the 1AR. This gives you a little bit more room to flow the arguments in other speeches with this extra column room, because instead of 8 columns, you're using 7. Some experienced 1ARs will even skip flowing the negative block arguments and instead notate their responses in real time. This saves them prep time, helps the 1ARs be a little bit more efficient when explaining their arguments in context of their opponents. If you're in detail flowing your opponent's arguments, you can get in a bad habit of the 1AR is kind of regurgitating the arguments of the opposition in too much detail, affecting not only the explanation of their arguments being more clear to the judge, but also, of course, trading off with time you could be spending on explaining your own arguments. As always, the central figure in the round is the judge. All decisions regarding organization should at least have some thought put into how it will be flowed by the judge. Sticking to what the judge is familiar with and avoiding any fancy, anything fancy at all really is typically the way to go. If you need to start with the last argument or you want to answer the impact of an argument separately, just make sure that you're notating and receiving some sort of indication that the judge is following along with you. Pause during your speech, as you say, I'm going to go to the impact of global warming. Watch them as they move their flow sheet around or look on their computer to click. You can usually tell when they're with you and ready to flow. Of course, don't make it too awkward, but just try to make sure they're following along. When flowing off-case arguments, typically the affirmative is going to dictate the ordinal structure or the numbering of arguments from the 2AC. The negative block and the rest of the speakers are going to clash with arguments based on that structure. For example, the 1NC may structure uniqueness, links, impact, for their spending disadvantage, but the affirmative responses are going to begin numbering in the 2AC. First, this disadvantage is non-unique. Second, there is no link. Third, the case outweighs, and so on. The negative will respond to these arguments in line with the 2AC. For example, the first argument was non-unique, however, extend our 1NC uniqueness evidence. It's from the New York Times. It answers their warrant that the Senate isn't on board. When flowing on-case arguments, the affirmative side will create an overall structure for things like the advantages and the solvency, but the negative will begin ordering typically by numbering their 1NC responses to the case. The 2AC will typically answer these arguments in the 1NC dictated order, even if they often group a lot of these arguments together or extend the 1AC arguments on the top of the flow kind of in an overview. They'll generally follow the 1NC order on these arguments, and the negative block certainly will reference this order when extending the case arguments in the negative block. There's occasionally going to be situations where a more experienced debater may decide that a more unorthodox order to answering arguments is going to be beneficial. These situations may include wanting to answer arguments from the bottom of the flow to the top. You might want to do this due to the focus of the debate being about the impact, which is typically on the bottom. Wanting to go bottom up might be beneficial. Another example could be that you want to answer the permutation separately in the 1NR, and but you still want the 2NC to debate the rest of the counterplan. In any instance, it's just really important to consider whether the change you're making makes things easier on you or becomes overwhelmingly harder for the judge and even yourself to follow along with. Just make sure you use explicit instruction to the judge before your speech about what you're going to be doing, and even during your speech, during the line by line if necessary. The most successful flowers often develop a consistent system for notating commonly used information in notes. From countries that they use over and over again to evidence sources, abbreviations and symbols are used to reduce the amount that your hand has to write, and also your brain has to review as looking at that flow during a speech and processing that flow. Very rarely do experienced debaters need more than 3 or 4 short words to notate even complex arguments. The amount you write should ideally stop as soon as enough has been written down or recorded to remind yourself of the full argument. As you continue to abbreviate and flow the same arguments over and over again, be conscious of these shortcuts that you're taking and try and incorporate them into a repeatable process. Some debaters, will get an additional flowing edge by pre-flowing speeches like the 1AC before the debate or the speech even starts. This can be especially helpful when getting used to proper spacing and new arguments, taking a little bit of pressure off yourself during the speeches by writing down, 1AC arguments ahead of time can be helpful. There are many opportunities for debaters also to use technology to assist their flowing. Many debaters now or judges can use Excel or spreadsheets as a replacement to traditional flow paper. And they can, oftentimes make using columns a little bit easier because you can use shortcuts and commands to add space in between arguments on the fly, and you don't have to worry about running out of room. And it's, of course, easier to save and recall these flows a little bit easier than the paper. If you're comfortable using some of these tools, I advise you to try them out, ahead of time in practice debates before, using them for the first time at a tournament. But in compliance with our technology use policy, a lot of people are using technology to flow, and it is certainly an option that you can consider. As we mentioned and will continue to mention, any organization or separation of arguments needs to be made with the judge in mind and brought clearly to their attention either during road mapping, signposting, or during the speech even if necessary. When flowing, be liberal and generous with the amount of space that you leave between arguments as you write them down the column. So, your 1AC arguments, in order you're writing down the column, leave space in between each argument. You though want to be conservative with the width of your arguments so that you leave enough room for future speech columns. You don't want 8 words written horizontally in that column. Just skip to the next line. It's better to do so and create space anyways instead of impacting the amount of space you have in future speeches too much. As mentioned in more detail in other parts of the discussion, it can be beneficial to further separate on-case and off-case arguments. Placing different advantages and or solvency on their own flow sheets can help ease confusion and organize piecemeal or out-of-order responses to these different positions in the debate. Likewise, putting each of the off-case positions on a separate sheet of paper can make addressing those parts of the debate easier. There are occasionally times when it can be beneficial to put specific arguments from particular parts of the debate on their own flow sheet. Generally you want to avoid this, but this can sometimes include overviews, permutations, add-on advantages, add-on impacts, or many others. Regardless, other debaters might use this tactic, so you should at least try and familiarize yourself with it. The key is that you want to bring the judge along with any of these unorthodox moves. And by unorthodox, I just mean more rare. And, make sure you weigh the advantages of doing so versus the confusion that can occur from making it more often that you're jumping around. One of the most important tools for informing yourself outside of the round is going to be your flow. Successful debaters are finding ways to record the specifics and events of each round, and then participating that either recording the rounds that they participate in themselves or that they watch. Recording these arguments and responses is enabling them to better prepare their own responses and think one step ahead of their opponents. Finding a consistent way to save and find flows from completed debates needs to be a priority for every debater that wants to be more successful. Using these past flows can provide vital information for yourself, either in rematches or, for teammates that debate common opponents. Knowing what your opponent is going to say before they say it can, feel like a superpower and win you debates against really tough opponents. An effective way to improve is completing rebuttal redos. Utilizing flows from completed debates, debaters and coaches are able to engage in speech redos. You might often pause, start, stop, change parts of your response, repeat parts of your response, to try and achieve this ideal rebuttal. While this is, far from the amount of resources or preparation that'll be available to you in a normal round, creating the best rebuttal with someone who's consulting you like a coach or a teammate can give you a model to strive for when you are in the actual round. When you're creating and completing negative and affirmative blocks, flows from previous or observed debates can help inform your argument selection and wording and word choice when creating the blocks. You want to grab arguments that worked for opponents or avoid arguments that failed for you in the past, and the flows really inform these decisions. I want to thank you for joining us and wish the best of luck to you. Don't hesitate to reach out to me directly if you desire. It's chris@atlantadebate.org, or via our YouTube channel. You can find plenty of other resources at youtube.com/AtlantaDebate.